The cold wind howled through the deserted streets, carrying with it the scent of stale rain and forgotten memories. Officer Daniel Carter stood motionless at the edge of the alley, his eyes scanning the empty shadows like a predator hunting its prey. The night felt different, darker, heavier, as if something was lurking beneath the surface, waiting to snap. The usual comfort of routine was absent tonight. There was no sense of peace in his movements, no calming rhythm to the beats of his heart. Daniel had been a cop for over 15 years, each one adding layers to his hardened exterior. The early days, full of hope and idealism, were long gone, buried beneath the weight of the world he had grown to know. He had seen it all: the blood, the bodies, the broken families. The city had its own rhythm, and it was one of survival. Only the strong survived, only the ruthless made it to the top. But tonight, something was different. The headlights of his squad car sliced through the mist, casting long, sharp shadows across the cracked pavement. His radio crackled with the usual dispatch calls, the mundane noise of an ordinary night. But there was something unsettling about the silence that followed. His hand tightened around the wheel, the steering column groaning beneath his grip. Control, 7 Adam 12, checking 1023 on a possible suspect near the corner of 5th and Lark. The words felt heavy, like they were weighed down by something that had yet to be revealed. Daniel knew what he had to do. He'd been trained for moments like these, swift, decisive, unwavering. But there was a nagging feeling, a whisper in the back of his mind that told him this wouldn't be like the others. It wasn't the usual drug deal or petty theft. This time, something darker was at play. The woman had appeared out of nowhere, like a ghost emerging from the fog. She was walking alone, her pace deliberate, her posture straight. Her eyes, even in the dim glow of the street lamp, were sharp, calculating. She was out of place in this neighborhood, like a marionette lost in a world that wasn't hers. The suspicion crept up on him like a shadow. He had seen enough to know when something was wrong, and this woman reeked of it. She moved too freely, too confidently, her gaze unwavering, as if she could see through him. Dispatch. I've got a suspicious female, black, late 30s, dark jacket, walking alone, possible 1031. A part of him knew he was jumping to conclusions, but his instincts, honed over the years, told him otherwise. She wasn't just another face lost in the crowd. There was something about her, something that didn't belong. He was trained to spot it, to recognize danger before it struck. He hit the lights, the harsh beam cutting through the mist like a blade, and the woman's pace didn't falter. She didn't even look his way. "Ma'am, stop right there." The command echoed into the night, sharp and commanding. His heart thudded, but his tone remained cold, practiced. There was no room for doubt, no space for hesitation. The woman paused, her back to him, but didn't turn around. The seconds stretched long between them, the quiet of the alley pressing in like a vice. She knew he was there. She knew he was watching. But why wasn't she scared? Daniel's hand moved instinctively to his belt, the familiar weight of his gun a comfort, but something inside him felt off. There was a stirring inside, something deep and unsettling. This wasn't supposed to be a difficult stop. But as his eyes narrowed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring down a mystery far more dangerous than he realized. And then, without a word, the woman slowly turned around, her face illuminated by the headlights. Her expression was calm, unreadable. It was as if she had known this moment was coming, as if she had been waiting for it. Daniel's breath caught. There was something familiar about her, something haunting. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. But then, just as quickly, the feeling passed, and the world snapped back into focus. His pulse quickened, but he maintained his stance, his eyes locking onto hers. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low and controlled. She didn't flinch. Instead, her lips parted, and she spoke the words that would forever change everything. "I'm Command Order 1. Daniel froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut, though they didn't make sense. No one ever said those words out loud. And yet, In that instant, he understood something far more profound than he could have imagined. This wasn't just a routine stop. This was the beginning of something darker than he could ever prepare for. And he had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, the words "Command Order 1" echoing in his mind. He couldn't place them, couldn't understand what they meant, but he knew one thing. She wasn't just some random woman walking through the dark streets of his city. She had purpose, and whatever that purpose was, it made her dangerous. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. She stood there, silent and unmoving, like a statue carved from ice. Her dark eyes met his with a quiet intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "Command Order 1." His voice was tight, controlled, but there was a flicker of uncertainty now. He wanted to dismiss it, wanted to believe she was just another person caught up in something criminal, that he was in control of the situation. But he couldn't. Something about her defied everything he knew about his job, his training, his world. "Do you know what that means?" she asked softly, her voice cold as the night air. Her words weren't a question, they were an observation. It was as if she knew exactly what was going through his mind, as if she'd already seen everything he'd done in this city. Daniel's grip on his gun tightened, his knuckles going white. "I said, step away from the vehicle," he barked, trying to regain some semblance of control. His heart was pounding, but he couldn't show weakness. Not now, not in front of her. But the woman didn't move. Instead, she looked at him with an unsettling calm. She didn't flinch, didn't show fear. She simply stared, her expression unreadable, almost calculating. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said, almost as if speaking to herself. "But you will." The arrogance in her tone struck Daniel like a slap across the face. He had dealt with all kinds of criminals, all kinds of defiance, but there was something different about this woman, something that made him feel small, insignificant. His training kicked in, and he stepped forward, trying to close the distance between them, his hand still on the grip of his gun. "You're under arrest," he growled, his voice filled with authority. "Put your hands on your head and get down on your knees." The woman didn't even blink. She didn't move a muscle. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her gaze still locked on his. "Do you think that badge gives you power?" Her voice was smooth, like ice skating over a frozen lake, chilling and deadly. Daniel's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of her words in his bones. He had always believed in the badge. It was everything, his protection, his right, his reason for existing in this city. And yet, this woman, with nothing more than a glance, was shaking his foundation. "Answer me," he snapped, stepping even closer. "I don't have time for games." She let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, as if humoring him. "Games, Officer Carter? No, this is no game. But you are playing one." And that's when he felt it. The pull of something deeper, darker, that twisted at the edges of his consciousness. His thoughts scrambled, and for a fleeting moment, Daniel lost control. He had been raised in this city, raised to believe that power was black and white. You either had it or you didn't. Those with power ruled. Those without were left to scavenge for scraps. This woman, her defiance, her calmness in the face of his authority, was everything he despised. She was the embodiment of something he couldn't control, something he couldn't break. She wasn't supposed to be in his world. "You think you're above the law?" Daniel's voice came out harsher now, tinged with contempt. His words dripped with the judgment that had been ingrained in him for so long, the belief that people like her were beneath him, beneath him. Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "No, Officer Carter. I'm not above the law." Her gaze hardened, like a predator eyeing its prey. "But you are." That was the moment it hit him. The weight of her words crushed him all at once. In his mind, it wasn't just her that was beneath him. It was the entire world she came from. His entire life had been built around that belief. Growing up in a tough, mostly white neighborhood, Daniel had always believed that people like him, like his friends, were superior. They had power, money, status, influence. They could walk the streets with their heads held high. People like her, the ones who walked through the dark, dangerous corners of the city, always out of place, always causing trouble. He had been taught to see them as inferior. The black woman in front of him wasn't a person to him. She was a symbol of everything he had been taught to despise, a product of the very system that had been built to oppress people like him. And that's why he couldn't let it go. He wouldn't let it go. He had been raised to believe that people like her, people who didn't look like him, didn't deserve the same rights, didn't deserve the same power. His disgust was rooted deep in his bones, passed down from his family, from his upbringing. But the woman before him, the calm, composed, and terrifyingly unshaken figure, was making him question everything. It was as if she was pulling the strings, making him see himself in a new light. "Step away from the vehicle," Daniel repeated, his voice shaking now, a mix of anger and fear. He had to take control again. He had to. But the woman didn't budge. She simply stared at him with those piercing eyes, as though she could see right through him. "Your power is a lie," she said softly, her voice steady and clear. "You've been fed the idea that your badge, your uniform, your whiteness, they make you better. But that's not power. That's oppression. That's fear." Daniel felt something snap inside him. It was like all the walls he had carefully built around himself, all the lies he had been told, all the hatred he had held onto. It was all crumbling. And it was terrifying. His chest tightened, and his grip on his gun wavered. This wasn't supposed to be happening. He was the one in control here. He was the one with the power. But the more he looked at her, the more he realized how fragile that belief was. The woman didn't flinch, didn't show a trace of fear. "You're not in control, Daniel," she said quietly, almost too quietly. "You've never been in control." His anger flared. He couldn't let her get to him. He couldn't let her win. With a sharp, practiced motion, he pulled his gun from its holster, aiming it directly at her chest. "Get down on the ground now." Her gaze didn't even flicker. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt something unfamiliar, something that terrified him. It wasn't just fear. It was doubt. Doubt in himself. Doubt in everything he thought he knew about this world. The woman stood there, her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief, unbearable moment, everything seemed to stop. And then, she spoke again, her words piercing the silence like a blade. "You think your badge gives you power over me," she said, each word deliberate. "But you're wrong. It doesn't. It never has. You just haven't realized it yet." Daniel's heart raced, and his mind spun with conflicting thoughts. He was supposed to be the one in charge here. He was supposed to be the one who dictated the rules, who decided who lived and who died in this city. But she was something else, something beyond the system, something that threatened to tear down everything he had ever believed in. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt like a puppet in a game he didn't understand. The woman smiled, as though reading his thoughts, before she turned and disappeared into the mist, leaving him standing alone, shaken, in the cold, uncertain night. Let's take a brief pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to our stories from? Has anything like this ever happened to you? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying the journey, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. Now, let's continue. The night had settled into an unnerving silence, the kind of stillness that gnaws at you, fills every corner with unease, and twists your thoughts into something darker. Daniel stood alone in the alley, his gun still clutched tightly in his hand, his body rigid with the remnants of the adrenaline rush. The woman, Command Order 1, had vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the faintest echo of her presence. It was as if she'd never been there at all. But he knew better. That encounter had rattled him more than he cared to admit. He'd seen violence in every form. He'd been a cop long enough to witness the darkest parts of human nature. He'd been raised to see the world in black and white, those who obeyed the rules and those who didn't. But this had shattered everything. The calm in her voice, the way she'd spoken to him like he was nothing more than a puppet, a cog in a machine he didn't understand, lingered in his mind. The rush of power he once felt with his badge now seemed hollow. Who was she? What did she mean by Command Order 1? And why did it feel like something was happening beyond his control? His fingers tightened around the gun as he snapped the safety back on, shoving the weapon into its holster. He needed answers, but deep down, Daniel knew that finding them wasn't going to be as simple as arresting someone or solving a case. Something bigger was in play, something that threatened to engulf everything he'd ever believed in. He needed to focus. He needed to get back on track. The night was still young, and there was work to do. He shook off the lingering unease and turned back toward his squad car. The radio crackled again, dragging his attention back to the present. 7 Adam 12, 10:29. Possible suspect on 8th and Miller. Proceed with caution. The words hung in the air like a summons. With a long exhale, Daniel slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaking beneath him as he adjusted the rear-view mirror. His eyes scanned the street ahead, his mind replaying that strange encounter. He had to push it out. He had to focus. There was a job to do. By the time he arrived at 8th and Miller, the scene was already starting to heat up. A small crowd had gathered on the corner, murmuring among themselves. A young black man stood at the center of it all, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes daring anyone to approach him. Daniel recognized him immediately. Marcus Jennings, a local troublemaker with a long rap sheet, the kind of guy who never stayed out of trouble for long. He had been a fixture in the neighborhood for years, always involved in something shady, always with a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't the type of guy Daniel had a lot of sympathy for. People like Marcus, they didn't follow the rules. They caused problems. And as far as Daniel was concerned, they got what they deserved. "Step back, people," Daniel barked as he pulled his squad car to a halt, the screech of the tires punctuating the air. The crowd parted, and the young man finally looked up, his eyes narrowing when he saw Daniel approaching. Marcus didn't move. He didn't seem afraid, didn't look worried about the badge on Daniel's chest. In fact, he almost seemed to be challenging him. "Hey, Carter," Marcus said, his voice dripping with defiance. "You're still playing the same game, huh?" Daniel's hand instinctively went to his belt, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of his taser. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He had dealt with Marcus countless times before. It was always the same: arrest, release, repeat. But this time, there was something different about Marcus. The way he stood there, the way his eyes bored into Daniel's, it was as if he knew something Daniel didn't. "You got a problem with me, Jennings?" Daniel's voice was cold, but his anger was beginning to bubble beneath the surface. He had been trained to de-escalate, but his patience was wearing thin. Marcus smirked, his hands still crossed. "You think you're better than me, don't you? You walk around with that badge, acting like you own this place." His voice was low, but it carried with it a venom that hit Daniel like a punch in the gut. "You don't get it, do you? You don't get that you're part of the problem." Daniel's jaw clenched. The insults were nothing new. He had heard it all before from guys like Marcus. But there was something in the way Marcus spoke that made Daniel feel like he was being attacked on a deeper level, like the words weren't just meant for him, but for the entire system he represented. A system that had taught him to believe that people like Marcus were beneath him. "You're a criminal," Daniel shot back, his voice laced with contempt. "You're nothing but a burden on society." The words were harsher than he intended, but they felt justified. After all, he was the one in charge. He was the one who had been given the power to make decisions, to enforce the law. People like Marcus, they needed to be put in their place. Marcus's eyes narrowed, but there was no fear in them, only a deep, unyielding hatred. "You think you can control me with that badge," he spat. "You think you can make me feel less than you just because you wear that uniform. You don't even know what it's like, do you? You don't know what it's like to be treated like dirt just because of the color of your skin." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. His eyes flickered to the crowd around them. They were watching, every one of them waiting to see how he would respond. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, the collective judgment pressing down like a heavy hand. His chest tightened. He had always believed the worst of people like Marcus. He had been taught to see them as nothing more than criminals, as threats to the order he was sworn to protect. He had always believed that people like him, white, entitled, empowered by the system, were in the right. But standing there, facing Marcus in the dim light of the street lamp, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Something that had been buried for so long, something he had suppressed deep within himself, was rising to the surface. Marcus was right. He had never understood what it was like to be treated as less, to be hated because of the color of his skin, to be forced to fight against a system that was stacked against him from the moment he was born. Daniel didn't know how to respond. The anger that had always been his shield, his protection against the world, suddenly felt weak. He wanted to yell, to fight back, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, there was a long, uncomfortable silence, and then, as if sensing the moment of vulnerability, Marcus broke it. "You don't have to like me, Carter," he said quietly, "but you need to understand something. You and we're not that different. We're both products of a system that's broken, a system that keeps us at odds with each other." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know how to respond to that. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything at all. Hours later, Daniel lay awake in his apartment, staring at the ceiling. The words Marcus had said to him echoed in his mind, twisting and turning in his head like a storm. He had always believed in the power of his badge, in the righteousness of the law, but now the questions were piling up faster than he could push them away. What was he really fighting for? Was it justice, or was it just the preservation of a broken system? Was Marcus right? Were they all just pawns in a game that no one had ever really understood? The darkness outside his window felt different now. He wasn't just staring into the night. He was staring into the unknown, into the questions that could unravel everything he had ever known. And for the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't sure where the answers lay. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized. He wasn't sure he even wanted to find them. The following days dragged on in a fog of confusion. Daniel's world, once as solid as the concrete beneath his boots, was beginning to crack. He had been a cop for so long that he thought he knew exactly how the world worked, who belonged, who didn't, and where the line between law and disorder was drawn. But that line was blurring now, and he couldn't seem to focus on it anymore. The streets, the neighborhoods, the faces, everything felt different, as though the entire city had shifted while he wasn't looking. Marcus's words echoed in his mind, haunting him in every quiet moment. "You're part of the problem." Every time Daniel closed his eyes, he saw Marcus's face, that smirk of defiance, those eyes that saw through him, judging him, accusing him. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt like a crack inside his chest. He wasn't sure where this questioning would lead, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening. The feeling had become like a shadow that followed him everywhere, looming, ever present, a constant reminder that the world he had once thought he understood was unraveling. It was another grueling night shift when the call came in. His radio crackled to life, jolting him back into the present. 7 Adam 12, we have a 1045 in progress at the corner of 12th and Jackson. Suspect is a known repeat offender, male, mid-30s, black male, high risk. Requesting immediate backup. Daniel's heart dropped into his stomach. He wasn't sure why, but this call felt different. His pulse quickened, the tension already building in his chest. He grabbed the keys and threw himself into the squad car, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as the sirens blared into the night. As he turned onto Jackson Street, he saw the flashing lights ahead. The usual cluster of officers was already there, but it wasn't the group that caught his attention. It was the man in the middle of the scene, There, standing at the center of the commotion, was a familiar face. Tyrone Davis, another local troublemaker, another criminal with a history a mile long. Daniel had arrested him before, seen him around enough times to know the drill. But something in the air tonight made him hesitate. His instincts were kicking in again, that gnawing feeling that told him this wouldn't be just another routine bust. Tyrone was tall, his frame heavy with muscle, his posture defiant, and his eyes full of that same contempt Daniel had seen in too many faces over the years. But tonight, there was something different about the way Tyrone stood, something that made Daniel feel uneasy. "Step back, Carter," one of the other officers said as Daniel approached. The officer, a younger man named Jenkins, was already out of the car, his hand resting near his gun. "We've got this under control." Daniel nodded, his mind still racing. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes flicking between the other officers and Tyrone, who was glaring at them all, hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Same old story," Jenkins replied, his voice sharp. "He's resisting arrest, trying to make a scene." Daniel's gaze narrowed. Tyrone wasn't going down without a fight. That much was clear. But there was something else. The air was thick with tension, as if this moment was about to crack open into something far worse. "You know him?" Jenkins asked, sensing the hesitation in Daniel's stance. "Yeah," Daniel replied, his voice tight. "I know him." Jenkins, sensing an opening, moved closer to the man. "You've been asked to comply, Tyrone. Put your hands behind your back." Tyrone's eyes flicked over to Daniel, and for a moment, their gazes locked. It wasn't the usual animosity Daniel had grown used to seeing from these men. This time, it was something more complex, more layered. Tyrone wasn't just angry, he was furious. His lips curled into a sneer, and his voice, when he spoke, was dripping with contempt. "Put my hands behind my back?" Tyrone laughed bitterly, his voice a low growl. "You think I'm going to let you put your hands on me, Carter? You think I'm just some dog you can control?" Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm but cold. "You're under arrest. Now, stop resisting and put your hands behind your back." Tyrone's laugh echoed through the street, mocking and cruel. "Yeah, sure. You're so quick to throw me down, huh? Just like the rest of them. You all think I'm less than you, think I'm nothing but some criminal to toss around. Well, guess what? I'm done with your system." Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd heard these words before. He had heard it from Marcus, from the countless others who stood at the wrong end of the law. But this time, something in the way Tyrone said it sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. There was a bitterness to it, a kind of raw, visceral hatred that cut deeper than usual. "You think this is about me and you, don't you?" Tyrone continued, his eyes flashing with rage. "You think it's just about me breaking the law and you playing the hero. You think your badge makes you better than me, don't you?" The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. He could feel the weight of them, sinking into his chest like a stone. It wasn't just Tyrone. It wasn't just this one man who was accusing him. It was every accusation, every sneer, every whispered insult, all of them coming to a head in this one moment. "Shut your mouth, Davis," Daniel snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "This is your last warning." Tyrone smiled, but it wasn't a smile of surrender. It was a smile of victory, a smile that told Daniel he was losing control, that this moment was slipping away from him faster than he could grasp it. And then Tyrone did something that would change everything. He raised his hand, not to strike, but to point at the officers gathered around him. His voice rang out, louder now, his words aimed directly at Daniel. "Look at you," he sneered. "You think you're some hero in this world, but you're just another piece of the machine that grinds people like me into dust. You walk around with your badge like it means something, but I see through it. You ain't better than me. You just have the power to control my life, to destroy it, to erase me, and you think that makes you special." Daniel felt the sting of those words. He had spent his whole life believing that his badge was a symbol of justice, a symbol of authority, but in that moment, it felt like nothing more than a burden, a weight that threatened to crush him. The officers around him were growing uneasy. The atmosphere had shifted. What had been a routine arrest was now something much more dangerous. Tyrone's words had found their mark, and Daniel could feel the shift within himself. For the first time in years, the lines between right and wrong weren't so clear. "You're not better than me," Tyrone repeated, his voice growing stronger, louder. "And the longer you keep pretending that you are, the worse this is going to get for all of us. You don't know what it's like to be me, to be us. You don't know what it's like to be judged by your skin, to be a target just because you're born black. But you'll figure it out sooner or later." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was as if the entire street was holding its breath, waiting for Daniel's next move. His heart was pounding, his thoughts racing. Everything was happening too quickly, and yet it felt like time had slowed down, as if the weight of Tyrone's words was pressing down on him with a force that he couldn't escape. Daniel felt the heat rise in his chest, his anger flaring. He was a cop. He had the power to end this. He had the authority. But as his hand hovered over his gun, something deep inside him told him that using it would be the point of no return. And so he stood there, caught between his duty and the reality that had been thrust in his face, staring at Tyrone as if for the first time. "You don't know me," Daniel said, his voice tight. "You don't know who I am." But Tyrone didn't flinch. He just stood there, eyes locked on Daniel's, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. "I know exactly who you are," Tyrone said quietly. "You're just another cog in the system, and until you understand that, you're never going to see the truth." It was only after Tyrone was hauled into the squad car and the scene began to disperse that Daniel realized how much his world had shifted. The anger inside him simmered, but it wasn't the same. The rage was quieter now, more introspective. It wasn't just about the man in front of him anymore. It was about everything. As he walked back to his squad car, his eyes were drawn to the dark sky above him. He wasn't sure what was next, but he knew one thing. Things were about to get a whole lot more complicated, and somewhere, in the back of his mind, he could still hear the echoes of Marcus's voice. "You're part of the problem." The days had begun to blend together in a haze of noise and confusion. Daniel couldn't escape the feeling that something was closing in on him, something dark and suffocating. He had lived his entire life believing that he had control, that the badge he wore was more than just a symbol. It was a declaration. He was a part of something bigger, something that defined right and wrong. But as the days passed, that certainty began to crack. It wasn't just the words of men like Tyrone or Marcus that had shaken him. It was something deeper, something he couldn't name. He had been a cop long enough to know that the truth wasn't always as clear-cut as the rules made it seem. He had always been taught that the law was a tool for justice, for order. But the more he saw of the world, the more he realized that justice was often nothing more than an illusion. And now, that illusion was starting to fade. The call came late, in the middle of another long, restless shift. Daniel was barely able to keep his eyes open as he sat in his squad car, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the night. His mind was still clouded with the events of the past few days. The arrest of Tyrone, the confrontation with Marcus, and the nagging feeling that something was coming, something he couldn't avoid. 7 Adam 12, 10:32. Suspect in custody at the corner of Oak and Pine. High priority, repeat offender. Requesting backup. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to hear the rest. He was already pulling into gear, the lights flashing on, the siren cutting through the stillness of the night. Hastam. When he arrived at Oak and Pine, the scene was chaotic. Police lights were flashing in every direction, casting an eerie glow over the street. The area was more familiar to him than he cared to admit. He had been here many times before, but tonight something felt different. There was an intensity in the air, a kind of suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. A crowd had gathered, shouting, jeering, pushing against the barricades the officers had set up. In the center of it all, he saw the figure of a man struggling against two officers who were trying to restrain him. "Back off, Carter," one of the officers called out as Daniel approached. It was Jenkins again, the younger cop who had been with him during the Tyrone arrest. Daniel nodded curtly, stepping closer to the scene. He could see the man struggling, another black male, his features twisted in anger, his hands bound behind his back. He was yelling something, but the noise of the crowd drowned out his words. It didn't matter. Daniel could see the look in his eyes, the defiance, the rage. The man had been arrested many times before, but this time, something about him seemed different. His eyes were wild, as though he knew something Daniel didn't. Jenkins turned to him. "This one's a real piece of work. Been on the radar for a while. You sure you want to get involved in this, Carter?" Daniel's eyes narrowed as he looked at the man in the center of the scene. "Yeah, I'll take care of it," he replied, his voice steady. As Daniel moved closer, he caught snippets of the man's words, fragments of rage, accusations, and what sounded like a warning. "You think you can control me?" the man yelled. "You think you can make me just disappear? You think you're any better than me?" Daniel felt the weight of the words sink into his chest. He had heard them before. They were the same words Tyrone had spoken, the same venomous accusations Marcus had thrown at him. But this time, there was something else in the air, something that felt more immediate, more dangerous. The officers struggled to keep the man under control as they brought him to the squad car. Daniel approached, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, judging him, waiting for him to make a move. "Who is he?" Daniel asked, turning to Jenkins. "Some nobody," Jenkins replied with a shrug. "Just another guy who thinks he can take on the world. He's got a record, been in and out of prison since he was 16. But tonight's different. He's been talking about knowing things, saying stuff that doesn't make any sense." Daniel's brow furrowed as he watched the man being shoved into the back of the squad car. His words were still echoing in Daniel's mind. "You think you're better than me?" "I don't care what he's talking about," Daniel said. "Get him in the car and let's get this over with." As the door slammed shut behind the man, Daniel felt the crowd's gaze shift to him. It was as if the weight of their eyes was pressing down on him, judging him, accusing him of something he couldn't name. He knew they were waiting for him to do something, to prove himself in a world that was growing increasingly hostile, increasingly fractured. Later, in the dimly lit interrogation room, Daniel stood in front of the man, staring at him through the one-way mirror. The man was sitting on the other side, his arms folded across his chest, his eyes locked on the door. He didn't seem scared. He didn't seem to care at all. Daniel had seen this before, the defiance, the refusal to acknowledge authority. But there was something different about this man. He didn't have the usual air of a criminal, broken, desperate, scared. He wasn't playing the usual part. The door opened and Jenkins stepped in, his face grim. "He's been quiet," Jenkins said, his voice low. "But we got him talking. He said something weird." "What did he say?" Daniel asked, his eyes never leaving the man in the room. Jenkins hesitated. "He said he knew something, about the Force, about you, about what's really going on behind the scenes." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What the hell does that mean?" "I don't know," Jenkins said. "But he keeps saying you're all part of the problem, all of you, that you don't see what you're really doing." Daniel clenched his fists at his sides. He had heard these words before, from Marcus, from Tyrone. But now it was someone else, someone who seemed to know things that were starting to make him uneasy. "I'm going in," Daniel said, his voice cold. He had to know what this man knew. He had to know what was happening, what was unraveling in the city, and in himself. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, the only sound the soft hum of the overhead lights. The man was sitting in the chair, his face expressionless, his eyes focused on the table in front of him. He didn't even look up when Daniel walked in. "Sit down," Daniel said, his voice rough with the tension that had been building for days. "We're going to talk." The man slowly lifted his head, his eyes meeting Daniel's for the first time. "Talk about what?" he asked, his voice calm, almost amused. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his frustration boiling over. "What the hell are you talking about? You think you can just come in here and start accusing me, accusing us?" The man's lips curled into a smirk. "You really don't get it, do you?" he asked. "You think you have all the answers, that your badge makes you better than me. But you're just another puppet, another cog in a machine that's broken. You're not in control, Carter. You never have been." Daniel's jaw clenched as the words hit him like a slap. He had heard it before, "You're not in control." But hearing it from this man, hearing it in this context, was different. It felt like a truth that was impossible to ignore. The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "You don't know what you're a part of, do you? You don't know who's really pulling the strings. But you will. Soon enough." Daniel's mind raced. His grip on the table tightened. "What are you talking about?" "You'll see," the man said softly. "You'll see. All of you will. But it'll be too late." Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was clear: the walls around him were closing in. And whether he liked it or not, the truth was coming. And it would change everything. As Daniel left the interrogation room, his thoughts were in turmoil. The words of the man echoed in his mind. "You're not in control." It was the same thing Marcus had said, the same thing Tyrone had said. But now, it felt different. It felt personal. He had spent his whole life believing in the badge, in the power it represented. But now, the cracks were too wide to ignore. The world he had built around himself was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As he walked down the hallway, he realized something. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. He was in the middle of something much bigger than he could ever have imagined, and he was running out of time to figure it out. The silence of the night was unbearable. Daniel sat at his desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room, its faint light the only thing breaking the suffocating stillness. He had barely slept in days, the events of the past week clawing at his mind with an intensity he couldn't shake. Tyrone's accusations, Marcus's warnings, the strange encounter with the man he had interrogated earlier. Everything was beginning to intertwine, forming a web of doubt and confusion he couldn't escape. His mind raced, swirling with questions that had no answers. What did they mean? Who was really in control here? And why did everything feel like it was falling apart? Daniel had spent years adhering to the rules, to the belief that justice was something you could touch, something you could control. He had trusted the system, believed it was the right thing to do. But now he wasn't so sure. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how easily the system he had sworn to protect could be twisted into something ugly, something brutal. And somewhere deep inside, he was starting to question whether he had been part of that ugliness all along. It was late into the night when the next call came. His phone vibrated on the desk, breaking the silence that had settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He grabbed it quickly, his fingers trembling with anticipation. It was a local tip, the kind he had received 100 times before, but tonight it felt different. 7 Adam 12, he muttered to himself as he read the message. Possible lead on the man from Oak and Pine. Meet at the warehouse on 3rd Street. Suspected ties to organized crime. Proceed with caution. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, slammed the door behind him, and made his way to the car. His heart was racing again, the familiar mix of fear and adrenaline flooding his body. There was something wrong about this whole situation, about everything, but he couldn't walk away. Not now. The drive to 3rd Street was one of the longest of his life. The city was a labyrinth of darkened streets, the kind that seemed to swallow sound and light, creating an oppressive silence that rattled his nerves. The further he drove, the heavier the weight in his chest became. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn deeper into something far beyond his control. As he pulled up to the warehouse, the air seemed to thicken, the usual hum of the city's nightlife absent in this forgotten corner of town. It was a place that reeked of decay, of things left behind and abandoned. But as Daniel stepped out of his car, he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The warehouse was large and dark, its windows covered with grime, the doors chained shut. It felt like a trap, like something that had been set for him, but he had no choice but to walk into it. As he made his way inside, the smell of mildew and old metal hit him. The floor creaked beneath his boots as he moved further into the darkness. His heart thudded in his chest, the silence pressing in from all sides. But as he moved deeper into the building, something caught his attention. A voice. A low, rasping voice. "You're not supposed to be here, Carter." Daniel spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. Standing in the shadows, just out of reach of the light, was a figure, tall, cloaked in darkness. He couldn't see the man's face, but he knew instantly who it was. Tyrone. "What do you want?" Daniel demanded, his voice sharp. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in around him. He was dangerously close to losing control, but he couldn't let this man, this criminal, have that power over him. "I told you." Tyrone's voice was quiet, almost mocking. "You're part of the problem. All of you. And now you're here, in the belly of it. Do you really think you can change things? Do you think your badge means anything in here?" Daniel's fingers tightened around the grip of his gun. "Get out of the way, Tyrone," he said through gritted teeth. "This doesn't concern you." Tyrone chuckled softly, stepping closer, his figure slowly emerging from the shadows. "Oh, but it does, Carter. It really does. You think you're different. You think you're special because you wear that badge. You don't understand anything. You never have." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had heard them before, accusations that he was part of a broken system, that he was no better than the people he arrested. But hearing them now, in this dark, abandoned place, in the face of Tyrone's unrelenting anger, they had weight, they had meaning. "You think this is about you and me?" Tyrone continued, his voice now filled with venom. "You're just another tool of a system that was built to crush people like me, like us. You don't even know what it's like, do you? You don't know what it's like to be hated just because of the way you look." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The words were like daggers, stabbing at him from every direction. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something he didn't understand. A void, a chasm that threatened to swallow him whole. "I'm not like you," Daniel spat, his voice shaking with fury. "I'm trying to make things right." Tyrone's eyes narrowed, a bitter smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Right. You think you can make things right. You think you can fix the world with a badge and a gun. All you're doing is perpetuating the same bullshit that's been going on for centuries." "Shut up," Daniel growled, stepping forward, his face flushed with anger. "I'm not listening to your excuses anymore. You're a criminal. You don't get to lecture me." But Tyrone wasn't finished. "You're the one who doesn't get it," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're the good guy, but you're not. You're just a puppet, a cog in a machine that doesn't give a damn about you. And when it's done with you, when it's used you up, it'll throw you away like everyone else." The words hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Daniel's heart was racing now, his thoughts spinning out of control. He didn't know what to believe anymore. The anger that had been his shield, his protection for so long, was starting to crack. The rage he had always relied on, the certainty that he was in the right, was beginning to fade. And in its place, something darker was taking root. "Come on, Carter," Tyrone continued, stepping closer. "You're not blind. You see what's happening, don't you? You see how the system works, how it's stacked against people like me, people like us. You think you're above it all because you wear that uniform. You think you're better because they gave you a gun and a badge, but you're just as much a part of the problem as the people you arrest." Daniel's mind was racing. The weight of Tyrone's words was suffocating. He had always thought he was different, always believed that he was doing the right thing. But now, in the face of Tyrone's raw anger, it all seemed meaningless. "You think you can change things," Tyrone continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you can make a difference by locking up people like me, by following orders from people who don't give a damn about you, about me, about anyone. You're nothing more than a tool, a cog in a broken machine. And when it's all said and done, when the dust settles, they won't even remember your name." The words hit him harder than anything he had ever felt before. Daniel was no longer sure of anything. The world he had built around himself, the system he had always trusted, was crumbling. The more he tried to hold on to it, the more it slipped through his fingers. Tyrone's eyes gleamed with something dark, something that Daniel couldn't place. "I've been trying to tell you, Carter," he said softly. "It's all coming down, and you're right in the middle of it. You're a part of it, whether you want to be or not." For the longest time, neither man spoke. The silence was thick, suffocating, each word hanging in the air like a weight that neither of them could escape. The shadows in the warehouse seemed to close in around Daniel, the air growing heavier with every passing second. He wanted to scream, to lash out. But Tyrone's words had left a mark on him. The anger that had fueled him for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by something else, something deeper. "You're not wrong," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse. "But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make it right." Tyrone's gaze softened for a moment, and for the briefest of seconds, Daniel thought he saw something human in the man's eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "Nobody does," Tyrone replied quietly. "But it's time for you to choose, Carter. You can keep pretending that you're part of the solution, or you can face the truth." Daniel's mind was spinning. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't know if there even was an answer. But in that moment, he realized something. The world he had been living in, the one he had believed in, was no longer enough. It was breaking apart, and he was caught in the middle of it. And whether he liked it or not, he was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. Tyrone turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Daniel standing alone in the dark, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Daniel's steps echoed in the vast emptiness of the warehouse as he stood there, alone. The words Tyrone had spoken kept bouncing in his mind, and with each passing moment, they seemed to grow louder, more insistent. "You're a part of the problem." It was as though the weight of everything he had done, everything he had believed in, had suddenly come crashing down on him. The echoes of those words were now etched into the fabric of his thoughts, refusing to let go. He had always thought of himself as the good guy, the one who enforced the law, the one who maintained order. But now, standing alone in the shadows of the warehouse, it felt like the lines between good and evil had blurred beyond recognition. Tyrone had been right. The system that Daniel had sworn to protect was broken, and no matter how hard he tried to fight it, he had been part of that broken system all along. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't sure who he was anymore. He barely remembered driving home that night. His mind was a whirlwind of doubts, confusion, and anger, all mixing together into a suffocating storm. His apartment, when he finally arrived, felt foreign, distant, as if he were a stranger to his own life. The walls that had once provided comfort now seemed oppressive, closing in on him as he sat in the dark, staring out the window at the city beyond. The city had always been his domain. He had lived here his entire life, but now it felt like an alien world, a place where he didn't belong anymore. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly understood. The phone rang, slicing through the silence. Daniel stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the name on the screen. It was Jenkins, the young officer he had worked with on a number of cases. They had always gotten along. Jenkins had been eager to please, to prove himself, and Daniel had respected him for it. But now, the sound of Jenkins's voice felt like an intrusion. "Hey, Carter." Jenkins said, his voice strained. "I've been hearing things about the warehouse, about Tyrone. People are talking, and they're saying that he's connected to something bigger, something dangerous. I think we're in deeper than we realize." Daniel's stomach twisted. He had already suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it feel real in a way he hadn't anticipated. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked, his voice low, cautious. "What's going on?" Jenkins hesitated. "I don't know all the details, but there are whispers. People are saying Tyrone has ties to an underground network. Criminals. But it's not just about drugs or theft. They're talking about something much bigger, much more organized. I think we're dealing with something that could bring the whole system down, Carter. I don't think this is just about us anymore." Daniel's blood ran cold. He had always known that the criminal world was vast, but this was something else, something that stretched beyond his understanding. "So, what do we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "We need to find out who's behind all of this," Jenkins replied, his voice tinged with fear. "We need to get to the bottom of it before it's too late." Daniel's mind was racing. He was torn between his loyalty to his badge, to the system he had always fought to uphold, and the overwhelming feeling that everything he had believed in was crumbling. The answers he sought lay somewhere in the shadows, and the further he went, the more he feared what he would find. The next few days were a blur. Daniel couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched, that there were eyes on him at every turn. He found himself doubting everyone, even Jenkins. He had no one left to trust. He was caught between two worlds, the world he had always known, where law and order were absolute, and the world that Tyrone and Marcus had opened up to him. A world where the system was corrupt, where the rules were rigged, and where the people he had always viewed as enemies were now asking him to see the truth. That truth was like a heavy weight pressing on his chest. Everywhere he went, he saw reminders of the injustice, the inequality that was embedded in the fabric of the city. The faces he had arrested, the faces he had judged, all blurred together into a single image of people who were, in his eyes, nothing more than criminals, miscreants, people who had chosen their path. But now, standing on the other side, he saw something different. It was as if he were looking at the world through a different lens, one that had been cracked wide open. What he had once dismissed as just the way things were now felt like the consequences of a broken system, one that had been built on oppression, on the very racism that he had never fully acknowledged. It was a few nights later when Daniel found himself at the bar. It wasn't the first time he'd been there. It was a place where he could escape, where he could let the weight of his job fall away, if only for a few hours. He hadn't spoken to anyone in a while, not in any meaningful way. There was no one left to trust. He sat at the bar, nursing a drink, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The faces of the people he had arrested, the ones who had stared back at him with so much defiance, so much pain, were now burned into his mind. He had always thought they were just criminals. He had never stopped to wonder why. "You're looking rough, Carter." The voice behind him was familiar. He turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Jenkins, who had slid onto the stool next to him. His face was tired, his eyes shadowed with worry. "Can't sleep," Daniel replied, his voice hoarse. "I keep thinking about everything. About the warehouse, about Tyrone, about what I'm really doing here." Jenkins took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room before turning back to Daniel. "You're not the only one. I've been hearing things, Carter. People are scared. There's talk about the department, about cops who are involved with the criminal network. There's a rat in the system, Carter. And people are starting to get nervous. They're starting to realize that the corruption runs deeper than they thought." Daniel's heart pounded. He had suspected it, but hearing it from Jenkins made it feel like a slap to the face. "So, what do we do?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jenkins leaned closer, his voice low. "We need to find out who's behind all of this, who's pulling the strings, but we need to be careful, Carter. We don't know who we can trust anymore. It's not just about Tyrone or Marcus anymore. This goes all the way to the top. The words hit Daniel like a brick. The top. Who could Jenkins possibly be talking about? The thought of betrayal, of the very people he had trusted for years, made his stomach turn. We need to find out who's behind it all, Jenkins repeated, and we need to do it fast. Daniel's mind was racing. He had always believed in the system, in the law, in the power of his badge. But now, that belief was slipping away. The questions, the doubts, everything was starting to crash down on him. And as he sat there, surrounded by the noise of the bar, he realized something. He had been living a lie. He had been part of something far darker than he could have ever imagined. And now, he had to decide whether to fight for it or to tear it all down. The next day, Daniel and Jenkins met in secret, in a place where no one could see them. There was no turning back now. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. "We need to get inside," Jenkins said, his voice tense. "We need to find out who's controlling this network, and we need to do it quietly. There are eyes on us. There are people who don't want us digging into this." Daniel nodded, feeling a strange sense of resolve. He had no choice now. He was in too deep to back out. "I'm with you," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Let's bring this down. Let's tear the whole thing apart." As they walked away from the meeting spot, the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on Daniel's chest. He didn't know if they were doing the right thing. He didn't know if they were making the right choice. But one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. The truth was out there. And whether he was ready for it or not, he was going to face it. The weight of the decision was heavier than Daniel could bear. The more he thought about it, the more the truth came into focus. The idea of tearing down the very system that had defined his life seemed almost impossible. Yet, it was becoming painfully clear that it was the only path forward. Each step felt like he was moving further from who he used to be and closer to something darker, more dangerous. The night was quiet, and the city had its usual sense of foreboding that hung in the air. It was the kind of night where the shadows felt like they were watching, like they were closing in on him. He could almost feel them tightening around him, pushing him deeper into a world he no longer understood. Daniel had already spoken to Jenkins. They'd agreed on their next move. They would infiltrate the network, uncover the truth behind the criminal empire Tyrone had hinted at, and expose the corruption within the department. But the more they planned, the more Daniel realized that this wasn't just about some rogue officers or underground crime syndicates. This went deeper. This was about the system itself, the very foundation upon which everything was built. And if they pulled at the thread, it could all come crashing down. The plan was set into motion. They had managed to dig up a few names, a few leads that could help them penetrate the web of corruption. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For now, they were working in the shadows, under the radar, hoping not to draw attention to themselves. They knew that if the wrong people found out what they were doing, it would be over. It would all be over before they had even begun. But there was one thing Daniel didn't anticipate: the toll it would take on him. Each day, it felt like he was losing a piece of himself. He had always believed that the line between right and wrong was clear. But now, it was nothing more than a fading illusion. The more he dug into the network, the more the ugliness of the system revealed itself. He began to see the faces of the people who had been crushed under the weight of it all. The black men and women, the poor, the marginalized, those who were pushed aside, silenced, and punished for simply existing in a world that was never built for them. And now, it wasn't just the criminals who were in his sights. It was everyone. Everyone who had turned a blind eye. Everyone who had let this system persist. The officers who had become complacent. The judges who had handed down the sentences. The politicians who had turned their backs. They were all part of it. And Daniel had been too. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. Daniel and Jenkins were walking a fine line, and every day brought new risks, new challenges. But something else had changed. Daniel began to notice the way people looked at him, the way the other officers looked at him. The suspicion in their eyes was hard to ignore. They knew something was off. They could feel it, even if they didn't know exactly what was happening. It was at a routine traffic stop that things took a turn. Daniel and Jenkins had pulled over a car on suspicion of carrying drugs. The man behind the wheel was a familiar face, another black man from the neighborhood who had always been a minor player in the street hustle, but there was something different about the way he looked at Daniel. It wasn't fear. It wasn't respect. It was something darker. Something that felt like he knew more than he should. Daniel approached the car, his hand on his gun, his eyes scanning the inside of the vehicle. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his voice authoritative but shaky. The man, whose name Daniel knew was Travis, didn't move immediately. Instead, he met Daniel's gaze with an intensity that made Daniel pause. There was a moment, just a split second, where their eyes locked. And in that moment, Daniel felt a surge of something, a flash of recognition. He couldn't explain it, but something about Travis felt familiar. "You're not like them, are you?" Travis said, his voice low but clear. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Travis smirked, his eyes never leaving Daniel's. "I know what you're doing. I know what you're looking for. You're trying to fix a system that's been broken for as long as I've been alive. You're looking for answers, but you won't find them where you're looking." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. It was as if the man knew everything, knew the questions that were racing through his mind, knew the very doubts that had been eating away at him for weeks. "Get out of the car," Daniel said again, his voice tighter this time. The anger was rising in him. The rage he had carried with him for years, the rage he had used to protect himself from the pain, began to resurface. But Travis didn't move. "I've seen it, Carter," he said softly. "You're not as different from us as you think. You've been part of the system your whole life, and now you're realizing it. You're not one of the good guys. You're part of the machine. Just like all of them." Daniel froze. The words were like a slap to the face. He had heard similar things before, but hearing them now, in the middle of a routine stop, made them feel different. Travis wasn't afraid of him. Travis wasn't intimidated by the badge or the gun. He wasn't scared of the man in front of him, and for the first time, Daniel realized why. It wasn't that Travis wasn't afraid of him. It was that Travis didn't need to be. Travis knew something Daniel didn't. "Just get out of the car, Travis," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Travis finally complied, stepping out slowly, his movements deliberate. He turned to face Daniel, the same smirk still on his lips. "You think you can fix it, Carter?" Travis asked, his voice cold. "You can't. No one can. The system doesn't work for people like me, and it never will." Daniel's chest tightened, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. The world he had been fighting to protect, the world he had believed in, was beginning to slip away from him. The confrontation with Travis lingered in Daniel's mind. It gnawed at him, distracting him from everything else he was trying to accomplish. And then, the next day, the unthinkable happened. Jenkins had gone missing. It started with a simple phone call that never came, a routine check-in that was ignored. Then, when Daniel tried to reach him again, the phone went straight to voicemail. Panic set in when he realized that Jenkins hadn't just failed to show up for work. He had vanished. For the first time, Daniel felt completely exposed, alone. It wasn't just the criminals or the corruption in the department that he had to worry about anymore. It was the people he trusted, the ones who had been working alongside him, the ones who had been helping him uncover the truth. Jenkins had been more than just a partner in this. He had been a symbol of everything Daniel had once believed in. Now, with Jenkins gone, it felt like the last thread of normalcy had been torn away. The system had already consumed him. It was consuming them all. Daniel didn't waste any time. He knew that if Jenkins had been taken, it was because someone had found out what they were up to. The network wasn't just criminals and dirty cops. It was something deeper, something more insidious. It was a system that operated like a well-oiled machine, one that had spread its tendrils into every part of life, every institution, every corner of the city. and no one was safe. He wasn't sure who to trust anymore. The walls were closing in on him, the pressure mounting as he realized that the fight he was in was far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. He wasn't just fighting for the truth, he was fighting for his life. He had been warned. Tyrone had said it. Marcus had said it. Even Travis had seen it. They had all known that this was bigger than him. And now, Daniel was beginning to understand just how true that was. The search for Jenkins was the beginning of the end. As Daniel delved deeper into the mystery, he uncovered things that shocked him to his core. His suspicions were confirmed. The corruption in the department wasn't just widespread, it was all-encompassing. The people at the top were pulling the strings, manipulating the system to their advantage. And in the end, Daniel realized that he wasn't just up against a criminal network. He was up against an entire system built on lies, on oppression, on the very racism he had once turned a blind eye to. The system was rigged, and Daniel had been a part of it for far too long. Now it was time to face the consequences. The storm had come, and there was no escaping it now. The truth had been exposed, slowly unraveling over the course of weeks, one revelation after another, each more damning than the last. The city, the system, the badge he had worn for so long, everything Daniel thought he knew was crumbling. He had started this journey thinking he could fix things, believing he was the hero in a battle for justice. Now, he wasn't so sure if there was even a clear line between right and wrong. Jenkins was still missing, his disappearance hanging over Daniel's head like a dark cloud. The police had launched an investigation, of course, but everyone knew it was a half-hearted effort. In the quiet corners of the precinct, there were whispers that Jenkins had gotten too close to something dangerous, something that had cost him his life. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was next. The closer he got to the heart of the corruption in the department, the more powerful forces seemed to close in on him. The people at the top, the ones who had been pulling the strings for years, were watching. They were aware of him now, and he had become a threat. The closer he came to the truth, the more desperate they would become. And that desperation, he knew, could be deadly. The phone rang again, pulling Daniel out of his thoughts. He had stopped expecting anything good. And yet, this call, this one was different. It was from an untraceable number. There were no faces attached to it, no names. But he knew it was important. "Hello?" he answered, his voice weary, cautious. There was a long pause before the voice on the other end spoke. It was deep, clipped, and cold, almost familiar. "Officer Carter," the voice said, "you've been digging too deep. You need to stop, or there will be consequences." Daniel's heart skipped. He recognized the voice but couldn't place it at first. The words sent a chill down his spine. "Who is this?" Daniel demanded, his voice tight, his fingers clenched around the phone. The voice on the other end let out a low laugh, a hollow, mocking sound. "You know exactly who I am, Carter. Or rather, you will soon enough. The problem is you're too late. You've already crossed a line you can't come back from. There's no way out now." The line went dead. Daniel's mind was racing. He had heard the threat, but it wasn't the words that scared him. It was the certainty in the voice, the chilling confidence that whoever was behind this knew everything. And it wasn't just about Jenkins anymore. It wasn't just about the corruption in the department. It was something bigger, something far more insidious. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for his life. The next morning, Daniel walked into the precinct with a heavy heart, the weight of everything he had learned pressing down on him. His steps felt slow, deliberate, as if he were walking through quicksand. Every officer he passed seemed to look at him differently. There was a certain wariness in their eyes, a suspicion that hadn't been there before. The city had changed, and so had he. His entire worldview had shifted in the past few weeks. What he had once viewed as black and white was now grey, full of nuance and complexity. The system he had sworn to protect had been corrupted from the inside out. The very foundation of his world, the badge, the law, the idea of justice, was all a facade, built to serve the few at the expense of the many. And as he looked around the precinct, He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. There were whispers. He could feel the eyes on him. The same eyes that had once trusted him, once believed in him. Now, they were filled with doubt. He was no longer just one of them. He was an outsider, a threat. They could feel it. He could feel it too. Daniel made his way to the back of the precinct, to the locker room, the place where he had once found comfort in the camaraderie of his fellow officers. Now, it felt like a cage. He stopped short when he saw Officer Hart standing by the lockers. Hart was a tall, imposing figure, known for his no-nonsense attitude. He had been a mentor of sorts to Daniel in the early days of his career, the kind of cop who believed in the us versus them mentality, the kind who had taught Daniel to look at the world through the eyes of a cop, not a civilian. But now, standing across from him, Daniel felt a pang of unease. Hart's eyes were cold, hard, as though he had already made up his mind about him. "Something's not right, Carter," Hart said without preamble, his voice low and controlled. "I don't know what you're up to, but I know it's not good for this department. I know you've been digging into things you shouldn't be looking into." Daniel's heart sank. He had known it was coming. The walls were closing in. "I'm just doing my job, Hart," Daniel replied, trying to keep his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "I'm just trying to get to the truth." Hart took a step closer, his expression hardening. "The truth. There's a lot of truths in this world, Carter, but not all of them are worth finding. You're treading on dangerous ground. And if you keep pushing, you're going to bring down more than just yourself." Daniel swallowed hard, his mind spinning. "What are you talking about?" Hart's face darkened. "You've been sniffing around places you shouldn't. The people you're digging into, those guys are protected. They have power, more power than you can imagine. You're making a mistake, Carter. The things you're finding, they're not something you can fix. They're not something you can change. And if you keep going down this path, you'll be buried with it." Daniel could feel his chest tightening. The words were a warning, a threat masked as concern. But it wasn't just the threat that scared him. It was the way Hart spoke, as if he already knew the outcome. As if Daniel's fate had already been sealed the moment he decided to dig into the corruption. "I'm not backing down," Daniel said, the words coming out more fiercely than he intended. Hart's eyes narrowed. "You don't get it, do you, Carter? You've already made enemies you can't afford to make. The moment you crossed that line, you became expendable. You're on your own now, and when this all falls apart, don't expect anyone to have your back." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Hart wasn't warning him to stop. He was warning him that there was no way out. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and tense, quiet moments in the precinct. Daniel continued his investigation, but he knew the walls were closing in. He wasn't just fighting criminals anymore. He was fighting the system itself. Every lead he followed seemed to lead to a dead end. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that the people he trusted, the people he had worked with for years, were part of the problem. They were complicit in the corruption that had infected every corner of the city. He was being watched. He could feel it. Every time he stepped into a room, every time he made a move, it seemed like someone was always one step ahead of him. He had become a target, a liability in the eyes of those in power. And then came the call. Daniel was at his desk, going over his notes when his phone rang. The number was unlisted, just like before, but this time there was no hesitation. He knew what it meant. "Hello," he answered, his voice cold and tight. "Officer Carter," the voice said, smooth and emotionless. "We've been watching you. You've done some digging, haven't you? You've gotten too close to the truth. But let me be clear, Carter. There is no truth that will save you now." Daniel's blood ran cold. It was the same voice from before, the same one that had threatened him earlier. "You think you can expose the people who control this city? You think you can take them down? You're a fool. Daniel's pulse quickened. He could feel the walls pressing in on him. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Who's behind all of this?" The voice laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down Daniel's spine. "You'll find out soon enough. But remember this, Carter. When you cross us, when you start digging into things you don't understand, there's no turning back. You've made a choice, and it's too late to undo it." The line went dead. Daniel sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The words echoed in his head. Too late to undo it. The message was clear. There was no way out. He had already crossed the point of no return. The storm was coming, and Daniel was right in the eye of it. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the precinct to find it in chaos. There was an air of tension, an unease that hung over the officers as they went about their work. The faces he passed were all watching him, some with suspicion, others with disdain. He had become a pariah, a symbol of everything they feared. He didn't have much time. He knew that now. But one thing was clear. The system was broken, and no one was going to fix it. Not unless they tore it down. The clock was ticking, and Daniel could feel the pressure closing in on him. Every breath, every step he took, felt like it carried the weight of the world. The air in the precinct had grown heavier in the last few days, as if everyone knew something had changed, but no one dared speak it aloud. Daniel had always prided himself on being able to handle the tension, but now it was different. The stakes were higher. The truth was like a ticking bomb, and it wasn't just his life on the line anymore. Jenkins was still missing. The department had given him no answers, just more empty promises. But Daniel knew what was really going on. Jenkins had been silenced, a casualty of a system too deeply entrenched in corruption to allow for anything to disrupt its flow. And now, it was Daniel's turn. He had been digging too deep, asking the wrong questions. He had become a threat, a liability. The city that he thought he understood, the city that he swore to protect, had betrayed him. Maria. He sat at his desk, the papers in front of him blurring together. The walls of the precinct felt like they were closing in, and each second that passed brought him closer to the inevitable. His phone rang again, and for a moment he hesitated. He knew who it was. "Hello," he answered, his voice rough, the exhaustion evident in every syllable. "It's time, Carter," the voice on the other end said, calm and menacing. "We've been watching you, and you've made your choice. There's no going back now. You know what you have to do." Daniel's heart raced. This wasn't just a warning. This was the moment that would define everything. "What do you want from me?" he asked, trying to steady his breathing, trying to make sense of what was happening. "What we want is simple," the voice replied. "You can stop digging, stop fighting against the system. You've seen the truth, but you've also seen the cost. It's time to make a choice. Stay in line, and things can go back to normal. Or you can keep pushing, and we'll make sure there's nothing left of you to push with." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. He knew they were watching him. They were always watching, always waiting for the moment he would falter. The system was too powerful, too ingrained. The people behind it had no mercy, and they knew just how to break someone like him. But as the words echoed in his ears, something inside Daniel snapped. He had spent his entire life playing by the rules. He had spent years believing in something that was fundamentally broken. And now, he was being asked to betray everything he had ever stood for. He couldn't do it. He couldn't be another cog in the machine. Not anymore. "Do your worst," Daniel said, his voice colder than he ever thought it could be. "But I'm not backing down." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and then the voice spoke again, this time with a touch of cold amusement. "You don't understand, do you, Carter? You've already made your choice, and you'll live with the consequences." The line went dead. Daniel stood up from his desk, his legs feeling unsteady as he walked to the window. He looked out at the city, his city, the one he had sworn to protect. But it was a city of shadows now, a city of lies. He had been part of the machine for so long, And now, as the walls closed in on him, he realized how much of himself he had lost along the way. His mind raced. There was no going back now. He had crossed a line, and there was no way to undo what had been done. But the question gnawed at him. Could he live with the truth? Could he live with the knowledge that everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, was a lie? The thought of Jenkins, of his partner who had disappeared without a trace, haunted him. He had been the first to see through the cracks in the system, and now Daniel could see it too. He could see the corruption, the racism, the oppression that was woven into the very fabric of everything he had ever known. The system wasn't just broken. It was built to keep people like Marcus, like Tyrone, like Travis, and like him at the bottom. And those at the top, the ones who controlled everything, would stop at nothing to maintain their power. That evening, Daniel drove through the streets of the city, the night air thick with the weight of his decision. The neon lights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows over the pavement. He had no plan, no clear direction. He was just driving, letting the road take him wherever it would. He didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. He couldn't stay in the department any longer. He couldn't be part of a system that perpetuated the lies, the inequality, and the violence. As he passed through the streets, his thoughts turned to Marcus, Tyrone, and the others who had dared to speak the truth. They had been right. They had seen it before him, had felt it long before he had. The system was broken, and it wasn't enough to just fight against it from within. It had to be destroyed, piece by piece. Only then could anything change. But Daniel was too late. He had spent too many years wearing the badge, too many years believing in a corrupt system, and now he was left with nothing but the remnants of his choices. Later that night, Daniel stood in front of the precinct, looking up at the building that had once been a symbol of authority. Now, it felt like a prison, a cage that had trapped him for so long. He had spent his life fighting for justice, for what he thought was right. But now, he realized that he had been a part of something that had never been just. His phone buzzed again, and when he looked at the screen, his blood ran cold. It was a message from Jenkins, if he was even still alive. "They've got me. You were right. They'll come for you next. Don't trust anyone. They've got eyes everywhere." Daniel's heart sank. Jenkins had known the truth. He had seen it, just as Daniel had. But it was too late for them both. The system would come for them one way or another. The next day, Daniel walked into the precinct one last time. The looks from the other officers were filled with suspicion, even contempt. He could feel the eyes on him, the weight of their judgment. It was clear he had become a pariah, but he didn't care anymore. He had made his decision, and now it was time to face the consequences. As he walked into the office, the captain, Hart, was there waiting for him. His face was hard, unreadable. "You're still here," Hart said, his voice flat. "I thought you would have run by now." Daniel stood tall, his eyes unwavering. "I'm not running," he said quietly. "I'm done. I'm done with all of this." Hart's face twisted in disgust. "You're making a huge mistake." Daniel looked at him, his voice firm, filled with a cold resolve. "The mistake was mine when I believed in this place." And so, Daniel Carter walked out of the precinct for the last time. He had no plan, no future, only the certainty that he could never go back to the life he had known. But as he walked away, leaving behind the badge, the gun, and the city he had once sworn to protect, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. It was a freedom born of the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous it was. The system might still be in place, but Daniel had seen it for what it truly was. And in that moment, he realized that the hardest thing he would ever have to do was walk away from it. But it was the only choice he had left. We'd love to hear what you think about this story. What are your thoughts on the journey Daniel went through? Have you ever experienced or witnessed racism in your life? Your feedback is incredibly important to us, and we deeply value each and every one of you. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day, and we'd love for you to write a phrase related to the story so we know you've listened all the way through. Your thoughts really do matter to us.